let us introduce our guests from Microsoft, well, you were on the Visual Studio team when you hired us last year for the road trip in 2012, and now you're on to bigger and better things. Matt Nunn is here. And a regular here, and from New York City, been in our industry for many, many years, the BI guy of our troupe here. Andrew Brust is here. From Magenic Technologies, star of stage, screen, and superheroes, it's Rocky Lotka. And of course, the UI guy we all know and love, been a XAML guy for years, a .NET guy for many years before that, it's Reverend Billy Hollis.
Oh, this is quite a lineup. I don't know where to start. So we've been on this tour. They're calling them the Modern App Development Tour. And I'm trying to decide exactly what a modern app is. Should we let the Microsoft guy have the first
Absolutely. I think
Mr. Nunn, what's a modern app?
What's a modern app? It's a good question that we get asked a lot. I have a particular point of view that has grown over probably the last couple of years as I've looked at where our industry was going to, and what do we actually mean by a modern app. And sometimes I joke, I'll hold my phone up and show you like a little lighter app on a phone and ask everybody, is that a modern app? Well, some people it is, because it's running on a device. It's using one of the new interfaces, new sets of APIs. So
Did you say a lighter?
A little lighter. It's much safer than a real lighter.
Nobody can take lighters into stadiums anymore, right? If you're actually, gonna wave along with the band, you use your phone.
I just want to make sure I knew what you were talking about. Okay.
Yep. So, so thinking about that, you could think about that as a modern app. You could think about any of the apps that run on your, your iPad or your Android or your Windows devices as modern apps. I actually like to think of it in a much larger format. So what I talk about a modern app, it's everything that you build for your organization, your company, whoever it is, that is your touch point to your customer or your end user. So, it's not just the one app that they go in to use, it's the way they engage with you. That is the modern app that you're building, and all of the pieces are tied together. And they have some, fairly distinct bits to them, like they're available on any device. So you don't get to dictate, certainly not to an end user and a customer, what device they're using. So you need to be able to have them access your systems or whatever it is they want to get access to from any device that they're on. It's going to deal with all of the data for the BI guy. All of the data, all of the personal information, it's going to be appropriate for them where they're using it at the time that they're using it. It's likely connected to the cloud, or at least cloud-enabled. So it has a portion of itself that runs in the cloud. It may not all be there. It may all be there, but it may be a hybrid solution. It's very likely to have that kind of service. So, when I think about sort of a company that has a modern app, I actually often go back to my airline. So I fly a lot, and I have many different ways that I touch with my airline. I have the website that I go to when I want to book a flight. I have my app on my phone, which I go to when I want to, when I'm traveling, I need to find out where I am. I interact with the kiosks in the airline. My information is with the people checking me in at the gate. It's with the people who are putting me on the plane. So all of those different touch points I have make the modern app, and it's all of that back-end infrastructure that actually delivers an experience to me, which is a modern app experience.
Does anybody want to tackle this question? Is it possible that a mobile web app on a phone could be a modern app?
Yes, of course it can. I think that in fact, we're seeing that area grow as JavaScript and JavaScript libraries mature, and it becomes more realistic to build websites or web apps, whatever you want to call them, that adapt to the phone, adapt to the tablet. And in fact, if you look at most of us, and I think a lot of you that have been here this week and that I've talked to over lunch are trying to figure out how to build an app that runs across the phones and the tablets. And this is a real challenge, right? Do you write all of your code 3 or 4 times, so you're native on all the platforms, or do you come up with some scheme by which you can write a set of maybe JavaScript code that more or less runs across all of them? So I think, of course, by Matt's definition, this would be just part of a modern app. But I think to a lot of us, we probably think that it is a modern app when we're doing that.
Well, and certainly tools like SignalR bring you a lot closer to staying always connected, in a mobile app.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To get that real-time feel anyway, right?
I also think that the web naturally lends itself to this intrinsic behavior of working across multiple devices anyway, and certainly sharing all that information. That the effect that I think you have to work very hard with a native set of apps to say, hey, I started this process on this device, then I switched to this other device, and I can just carry the process on. That seems easier in the web world than it does in the native world.
Yeah, maybe. I think the web is just an expression of the interface, right? The actual app, the part you're talking about that makes that seamless transition from device to device, is actually all the back-end stuff that probably runs in a cloud or in your own servers. So I'm not sure the web necessarily makes it easier. The big thing is that if you want to switch from an iPad to an Android tablet, did you have to write that end user experience in Objective-C and write it in Java?
Right.
And then are you maintaining it twice for the next decade? Right? I mean, people often don't stop, especially business people that are asking us to write these things, don't stop to think that we're going to write it in Objective-C, Java, and .NET, and then maybe again in .NET on the server if you don't want to try and share your code. And then you're going to maintain those 4 code bases for the next 5 to 10 years.
Each new feature is done 4 times.
Yeah, we kind of tried this in the 90s, right? There were a lot of apps that were built with VB or Power Builder on the client and C++ running on the app server. And our industry has a short memory, right? But that didn't work well. It was ridiculously expensive because the odds of getting your business logic, even simple things like validation, out of sync between the C++ and the client were extremely high, right? And so the maintainability just plummets.
And so yet, one of the key features now we're seeing of these modern apps is cloud synchronization across devices. Keeping the state in the cloud and keeping sync. And I talked about this in my little warm-up to our talk today, is that's where the real magic is. The Xamarin guys talked about RDIO, or RDO, I think it's called. Yeah, RDO, which is a streaming music service that keeps sockets open on the client. And when you move from client to client, your music stream follows you in sync wherever you go from client to client. So the actual state is in the cloud, not on the device. And you pick one up, put another one down, and it just moves with you. That's just magic to me. But it seems like that's the stuff we were trying to do with the app server architecture way back in the day that just seemed impossible. What's different about it now? Is it that we have bigger data centers, and we have Azure, and we have Andrew, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's different ways of looking at this. Some of this is kind of magic, and some of it is kind of positive, but I think there's a cynic's view to this as well, which is that modern is sort of a euphemism for messed up. We have platform fragmentation that we didn't have to worry about for a good 15 years. This is something Rocky talks about a lot. The industry tends to pendulum between, having some core standards and then going all over the place. You mentioned I look at BI a lot. I also look at big data a lot, and that is just fragmented like crazy. And I'm looking at this wondering why people are celebrating it. And when it brings in all kinds of costs and management overhead, but it also brings about some innovation that in the more kind of staid, run-of-the-mill course of things, we avoid that because it's disruption can be good, disruption can be bad. So to some extent, modern apps are, it's a set of technologies and tools for dealing with the fact that we have to run on multiple platforms. And it's not just multiple form factors and scenarios, although that's part of it, but we have a very imperfect world right now. So it's not, I don't know, it's not all celebratory.
And you consider imperfect because it's heterogeneous?
Yes.
So we actually have a customer down in Austin called National Instruments who makes things for controls for monitoring buildings and stuff, so bridges and things, make sure they're not breaking. And when I was talking to him, he was, to your point, he said, I used to love the Wintel world. The Wintel world was awesome because I could reach like 98% of my customers, only ever writing one thing. And all of a sudden, in the last 5 years, I now have to have multiple different teams who can do multiple different technologies to be able to target what my customers need.
Right.
So there was a lot to be said for having a kind of a monopoly. Because it did make it a lot easier for everybody out there who's actually building applications. I mean, what National Instruments have done, they actually are a Xamarin customer, and they discovered that they had lots of C# programmers, and Xamarin was the way to bridge the gap into, taking those skills, but being able to deliver onto an iPad and onto an iPhone, which is what their customers need them to do.
So, I think you look at the cloud and you look at, HTML or hybrid apps, and they're good sort of solutions of compromise for dealing with that heterogeneity. They're not necessarily optimal operating environments for everything, but, they make something, ridiculous, more manageable, feasible, digestible. So in that sense, they're very good. I'm sure we're going someplace good. I don't think we're at the destination yet.
Bill, you've been disturbingly quiet this whole time.
It's true.
We've got something
There's
brewing
probably
there.
pent-up rage coming.
Why disturbingly is that?
Because, this is when...
Because it's unusual.
Well, the discussion is kind of going off in a direction different from the whole way I look at it, so I let everybody else play it out. Because,
chime in here, please.
well, to me, to rewind to what a modern app is, it has a lot more to do, in my mind, with how the user interacts with it than it does with how it's structured on the back end. Magic to a user is magic, and they don't care.
Yeah.
And I would certainly agree that it's all about state, and of course, native platforms are really good at working with state, and then we have cloud-based stuff that's good for state, and that's a part of it. But really, it has more to do, in my mind, with does the application have a task flow that makes sense for the user in a very granular way that our traditional applications have not? Does the application have the visualization of data in a way that the user needs to see it? To me, that's one of the key components of a modern app.
Yeah.
That you don't put up a number for BMI, you put up a graphic that's fat if the BMI is big or something, that you visualize the data into the application the way the user needs to see it, and that you accommodate the interaction patterns that make sense for the user. So to me, that's what makes up a modern app. And the other way that it's kind of skewed away from the way I think about it is when people talk about modern apps, they spend a lot of time talking about things that are exposed to the consumer space, because that's how the entire area got started, with the iDevices, et cetera. But the vast majority of, at least I hope, that the vast majority of what we would put in the modern app category will end up getting developed for businesses.
Yes.
We won't see them for the most part. We develop those apps all the time, but I can't show them to you because modern apps require design and investment. And my clients don't want to give that away to you for free after paying us the money for it. So to me, that's a lot of what's going on in the business world with modern apps. And let me tell you, those guys, if I'm going into a healthcare world doing something for nurses on a floor, or I'm going into a warehouse for that's shipping stuff and doing a mobile solution for them, this HTML5 thing is not going to make it for them because the productivity is what matters. And those people aren't bringing their own devices. We give them whatever device they want.
Right.
So we look at situations where, to us, if we have to do it on multiple stacks to make it work for different, well, we suck it up.
In the end, though,
Look, if the app goes out and saves you tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars because the value and productivity that it adds, I'm sorry, the developers just have to suck it up. We're going to have to go ahead and develop this app for whatever platforms it needs to be on and figure out how to maintain it. because
you
that's
said-
what the
you
business
said
needs.
something about HTML5 isn't going to cut it, but at the end of the day, aren't they just going to click an icon and an app is going to show up, and do they care what it's written in?
No,
If it
that's
works?
just it. See, the user doesn't typically care what devices that something runs on. They don't care about reach. All they care about is, does it run on the device I got in my hands
Yeah.
right now?
Does it work for me?
That's really all they care about.
Yeah.
So yeah, if there's an easy way for them to get their hands on something, then the rest of it can just be magic and they're fine with it. We stress over this stuff, but the users don't.
Yeah, it's just not that important to them.
Well, but I think that we stress as developers because we have platform biases, right? But we get paid from somebody. This is the part that actually concerns me. If I have to switch from C# and go to TypeScript, right, so be it, right? In fact, maybe it's kind of a cool challenge, right, as a developer. But to me, and I'm sure this is true for most of the people in the audience, you get paid from somebody, and they are concerned about how much it's going to cost. And if you tell them explicitly that it's going to cost, let's say, 3 or 4 times as much to build and maintain this app because you're going to have to write it 3 or 4 times, right? They're going to have to go through a cost-benefit analysis in the end to decide, did they save enough hundreds of millions of dollars to pay, for this software development over time?
It isn't 3 or 4 times as much. A well-architected app has stuff on the services that run that get used by every experience that's out there. You even shape, or at least we do, we shape models there. Our rule of thumb is to support a new stack is 10 to 15% additional cost on top of whatever we did before.
Is that for
So
development?
now
Is that for development or for maintenance?
Well, pretty much the same going forward. That is, whatever it costs for development is roughly going to be proportionate to what it costs
Well, and
for maintenance. The worst part about it is, if you're not big enough to scale, that you have to keep people on staff for the different stacks. That's the big sticking point. You have to be above a certain scale for that to work.
And that's kind of my point, right? If you're a small or mid-sized company, are you really going to employ 3 different developers where you used to get away with 1?
You probably are not, but if you're a small to medium-sized company, you probably don't care that it runs on that many different devices either.
Well,
'Cause
a
you've
lot
got-
of
you've got
a lot
pretty
of them
restricted-
seem to. That's, I think, the problem.
Yeah, well, I talked about that in the keynote yesterday. The executives care,
Yeah, exactly.
but the guys working don't care.
Yeah, well, I think that's where this whole bring your own device movement came from. Was 3 years ago when the iPad showed up, the CTOs bought them, and they came to work and said to their director of IT or the director of engineering, "Hey, I'm going to be using this. Figure it out." And I wonder if this is a phase, like if this is going to pass very quickly, because at that time there was no answer to that except yes, sir. Now that there's a larger diversity of devices, ones that can be controlled and monitored, can't he now turn back and go, that device costs us too much to manage, here, have one of these, it's something
Yes.
we can manage.
Well, and that's kind of my point, is I think it is a phase. I think ultimately, especially if, for public companies or even private companies, at some point, so let me lay this out a little, because I spent many years working in manufacturing, actually biomedical manufacturing. And industry-wide at the time, the IT budgets averaged 1.2% of revenue.
Right.
And so if you come along as an executive with your fancy iDevice and say, hey, I need all these corporate apps to work, because we're not just talking email, that stuff's easy, right? That's automatic. But we're talking, we need you to build your corporate apps to run on the iDevice in addition to Windows, which it's been doing for the last 20 years. And that drives your cost of IT from 1.2 up to 1.4,
right?
Let's say.
And that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And now you're out of line with the rest of the industry, or the entire industry is now elevated to 1.4, in which case now the customer, which is all of us, because we're all eventually consumers of medicine, get to pay a higher price because we're paying because some executive wanted to see a dashboard on his iPad.
Right.
Right? I mean, is that not what's going on?
And who has to suck it up now? See, I don't
at some
think.
point, I think that executive gets canned because it's his damn fault that the company
started
lost
this.
a bunch of money. Yeah, right. Or probably more likely, it's not the executive; it's the IT director that didn't say no.
Yeah.
right? Because that's where the shit's going to hit the fan. Can I say that?
Yeah.
Well,
They can edit it out.
I think you just did.
Edit point.
Because I don't think you sucked it up. I think you pushed back and got the funding for that extra functionality. Somewhere somebody has to pay for this. Rocky just showed us a scenario where the customer's paying. In your case, your client paid. But you can't just be glib and say suck it up and write it 4 times or 1.15 times 4 times.
Well,
Eventually it has to be funded.
when I say we have to suck it up, we want to put our preferences in, and our preferences tend to be, we understand a certain path, we understand certain technologies, and so Rocky talked about the fact we have the bias in that direction.
Sure.
And we want to go that way regardless of whether that's good for the business or customer. If you can make a convincing case that it's better for the business to do these 2 platforms, then even though one of them I don't like very much. See, this comes up all the time because I don't like iOS. I hate programming for the iPad. On the other hand, that is typically after Windows, the second platform that we have to do, and we suck it up because that's required for particular business scenarios. Yeah, we're going to push back.
I'm just saying you suck up the fees as well.
That's true, but what the business is, I'm explaining the cost to them and saying this is how much extra it's going to cost. Is it worth it? Do you have the business benefit for that? And by the way, I can probably do it in about half the amount of money on a Windows 8 device than I could on iOS because it's so much faster to develop on. So would you rather have that? And if it's buying 200 machines for guys down in the warehouse instead of a dashboard for them, that's what they're going to say is, yeah, why don't you do that?
And I think that to that point, it very much depends on the industry that you're working with. If you're in a warehouse or if you're, fixing streets and you need a device out there, completely should have control over what device you give. So you'll pick a Windows device, that's what everybody who does that will get. There is no real option to bring your own. Then you have other industries or other areas of industries like the execs and stuff who are very much driven by what they bring in from outside. And you have to remember that, 5 years ago, the best technology you used, actually more than 5 years ago now, the best technology you used was the stuff you used to work.
Yeah.
And that is nowhere near the case now.
Yeah,
With a 3-year life cycle on a laptop, the world has changed completely by the time I get a 3-year refresh tab.
Yeah, and I think laptops are still revving like that, but fundamentally, desktop machines haven't changed much since about 2001. They've been fast enough since the P4 era. The screens have improved.
They've gotten cooler.
Yeah, and they don't run quite so hot, and they look a little nicer. But, my spreadsheet's been calculating in under a second for 20 years. And the fact that you can get it down to a quarter second, I don't care that much.
Remember that argument you and I got into about whether Moore's Law was at an end?
Moore's Law
Thank
is
you for agreeing with me.
still not at an end. Pretty comfortable with you being wrong on that, Rocky.
I think you just validated my whole argument. I feel great.
Well, and that core statement is fine. It just has nothing to do with Moore's Law.
The one thing I would say, though, Matt, that I think is interesting to think about is this is not the first time that we've encountered the case where home computing is faster than work, because the PC did this. Back in the early 90s, when we were all using mini computers and mainframes and whatever else, the PC showed up, and all of a sudden everybody's home computer tended to be way faster and nicer to use than what they had at work.
It was the spreadsheet revolution.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
When a guy with an Apple II doing VisitCalc was running rings around a guy calling back to a Burroughs 3000 to try and do a month end, that was devastating, and everybody bought an Apple. Well, actually, the machine was the original IBM PC with Lotus 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Of course, the fundamental difference, though, was I couldn't put that in my pocket.
Well, but is that difference relevant ultimately? Because what happened, of course, is that, and maybe it is, I don't know, but I'm questioning, because ultimately what happened is this economic concept of a natural monopoly kicked in, right, where IT departments couldn't afford to support every random, in fact, at the time, we settled on one specific type of PC because the variations between different PC models were too high to deal with.
Sure.
Right? I mean, the modern concept of drivers wasn't as mature. And so you could switch from, NEC PCs to IBM PCs and all your software would fail. Right? So we were...
I remember having to select the hardware based on the apps we were going to run and which one actually, the drivers that actually ran across each of them, right?
Exactly.
framework came with 5.25-inch discs and 40 driver discs.
All right.
So the question that I'm posing, I guess, is has something fundamentally changed, either because the devices are so cheap or because they fit in your pocket, such that IT departments are going to continue to pay to support random, how many variations of Android plus iPads and Windows and blah, 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 right? Or given 5 years from now, will this have all sorted out and there will be one platform, much like Windows was for the last couple decades?
I mean, I think something fundamental has changed, which is that, we used to sort of say having a work-style machine at home was cool, and now we have machines that are truly more personal and ingrained in our social lives, and that is putting the influence going the other way. On the other hand, it is just a repeat of the cycle of things going from being centralized and controlled to being just kind of pedestrian and varied. And pedestrian and varied is great. It promotes a lot of pilots and a lot of experimentation, but eventually that has to be productionalized or it's not cost effective.
Well, that's why we went to the browser, though. When you saying the drivers are different for every PC, the reason people adopted the browser, and I'm going to keep the web and the internet different things.
Got it.
Browsers are different to the internet. It was just a way of always being able to render on any machine, no matter what drivers I had installed, because it was a common shell that I rendered inside. Of course, it wasn't very powerful, so then we continually put things back on the machine.
It also wasn't very common, right? Like
Not originally.
each browser, well, even now,
I suppose that's true.
we're still battling the fact that you try and build one web page that works for all of them, but you keep having to if browser then.
But that's a cycle too. We had IE versus Netscape. We had to write everything twice. Eventually that didn't work out. IE won. Eventually IE became kind of, fossilized and people got pissed off about that. And boom, now we have 3 or 4 browsers.
All right, so at the risk of us being too polite and going back in history for the rest of the hour, let's be controversial and look forward. Rocky, on the last time we interviewed you on the Tablet Show, you were quite, I would say controversial in your statement that you really think HTML and JavaScript is going to rule the enterprise. Are you still of that mind?
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on that. I think that to a large degree, it seems like the only 2 main options that we've got right now are either Xamarin, because that lets you run C# across all your platforms, and .NET, right?
Yeah.
Or it's JavaScript or TypeScript or, but basically some JavaScript-based thing. And yeah, so there's a lot of browser fragmentation, and I'm not a huge, Google nut here, but the reality is there is a browser that runs across all the platforms. It's called Google, right? Or Chrome, rather.
Right.
Chrome, right.
And brain fart. But yeah, so we've got Chrome, so it seems reasonable to think, and I'm not saying this is a foregone conclusion, but it seems reasonable to think that, yeah, we might start building all of our apps using JavaScript or some variation with HTML targeting Chrome, because that at least provides some reasonably consistent experience across all the devices.
Now, we all know what happens is that we say, oh, this is going to be the way it is. And of course, maybe we get that way, and it is that way for a while, and then things change again, because this is what happens. So, I find it interesting thinking about another phone platform or another tablet, another phone OS coming out of nowhere and completely knocking Android out. Something that we think of as inconceivable. Something that just comes out of nowhere and blindsides everybody, and it's completely possible.
That's what happened to BlackBerry in 5 years.
Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the stuff that happens. It's disruptive. It's a disruptive world out there.
That's why I don't think you want to make that kind of linear projection based on what we've seen in the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty skeptical that is actually going to be the.
Well, and to be fair, I agree with Billy on this. I think we're in the middle of an industry-level inflection point. So anybody who authoritatively tells you where we're going to be in 5 years
right.
is full of it. And I certainly don't mean to do that. What I'm just trying to look like all of us at what are the possible array of options at our feet right now. And to me, the most relevant or I don't know, possible option at the moment seems to be JavaScript.
Well,
right?
it looks, I think what you're saying here is, if I'm hearing you right, is that it looks like if you're writing JavaScript in HTML, that platform will tend to stabilize more, we think.
Well, it might. The counter to that, to argue against myself, if you will, is that unlike the highly successful platforms of the past, .NET, Java, COBOL, Fortran, there's no good
Controlling authority.
Controlling authority.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the term I'm looking for. And so the innovation in JavaScript and HTML is pathetically slow.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the source of my skepticism, because I look at all the different ways, the ways we interact with people now, with machines now, the touch being one of the big breaking change of the last 5 years. I think that's just the beginning of the way that people are going to interact with machines going forward. In my keynote yesterday, I talked about the armband, the Mayo. That is, I think, one of the possible paths to be a game changer on the gesture side. And then I talked to one of the attendees here who talked about he contributed one of the Kickstarter projects for the brainwave reader thing that's
Right.
going to sit
Emotive.
on your head.
Yeah, emotive.
What are the impacts of that going to be? Well, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that innovation won't be done first in the HTML5.
Sure.
Well, but one thing that you you said it does move slowly, HTML and JavaScript, but it does seem to move together. You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is it does seem to move into a cross-platform compatibility, gets better over time, does it not?
Oh, I
And
think
less
it
fragmented?
does, and I think it has a
Even
really
though it's
good
slow?
possibility for being a 60% solution, or maybe even 70% solution for the software that gets developed out there. I think it has a very good chance of that. But the problem that I see is that I talk to too many people who really seem to believe it's going to be a 95%, or even I've talked to people who, everybody is going to be writing every client thing they do in HTML5 in 2 years.
Are there
That's
incentives?
just ridiculous.
Are Microsoft, Google, and the major browser players, do they have any incentive to fragment?
Yes, of course. You would think they would. In fact, I'm shocked, and I constantly wonder what I'm missing, because here's my train of thought, and that is that if all the apps that we write, especially all the business apps that we write, can run on an Android, like $60, $70 Android device, or a several $100 iPad, or a $1,000 PC,
Or a $30 Raspberry Pi?
Right, but it can run across all of these. Then if you're an IT buyer, why would you ever buy an Apple or Microsoft anything? Because they can't even remotely compete with the low-cost Android devices. Never will be able to, right? Apple sells hardware, and they sell premium hardware. And they'll continue to have a market with the people, home people that have disposable income, just like people buy BMWs, right? And Microsoft will have a market for the same reason, because they're maybe not quite as sexy as Apple, but they're still pretty powerful, pretty nice, right? So they're a kind of upper mid-range car. But most people in the world drive pretty low-end car, or no car, but in the U.S. at least, are driving Honda Accords or Ford Focuses, or utilitarian cars that are perfectly fine, but they're not a BMW, right? And that's the Android of the world. And so it seems to me that both Apple and Microsoft in particular should be highly incented to sidetrack the whole JavaScript thing, because ultimately it means their doom, at least in the broad marketplace.
But, okay, so Microsoft guy, don't answer this. You three. Do you think Windows will ever be free?
Free? With an F-R-E-E? Free? I don't. I mean, I think Microsoft is in a very strange, dissonant state right now. The state of the art is for everything to run everywhere, and for some reason, I think even Microsoft lusts after that, even though it's against its own interests. But that's kind of where the industry is right now, and it wants to be contemporary, even if that existentially makes no sense. I think eventually things will rationalize. And no, I don't see them giving away their cash cow, unless maybe it depends how you define Windows. Maybe Windows Client will be free and Windows Azure won't be.
Oh, I didn't mean Azure. I meant, client, Windows client.
I still don't think so.
Rocky?
I don't know. I can't understand Microsoft's embrace of JavaScript and the amazing contributions they're making to Node.js and other open source frameworks. I mean, because it's not just that they're making it run well on Windows. They're contributing to the broader world. They're making sure that Visual Studio is a great place to build iPad apps, right? And you chuckle, but it's true, right? It's true. And in fact, maybe in the end, it may only be developers that run on Windows.
The best thing about my Chromebook is that the Office web apps run beautifully on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
right.
astounding.
Exactly. So in the end, Microsoft might choose to give Windows away for free. They're already helping us build free, essentially software for the other free platforms on the planet. So where they're going to make up the missing revenue becomes a real question, because I don't think we're going to pay enough for Visual Studio to offset the lost Windows license revenue, right?
All right,
You're
Mr.
giving
Nunn,
him
you've been
coughing
quiet for a long time, just the coughing.
I can't comment.
You're not going to go there. That's fair.
I am absolutely not going to step into whether
No, I
or
didn't
not
expect
Windows-
you would.
No.
Billy, you got to have an opinion.
I think, I would say, though, what's interesting is you have to remember also that Windows isn't really the cash cow anymore.
Right.
You talked about Office on your Chromebook. Mm-hmm. Okay. Office is a bigger business than Windows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but Windows is not a small business, though.
No, but the whole thing about Microsoft was 16 lines of business that gross more than $1 billion. Right? Windows is one of those. Right? SharePoint's huge. Exchange is huge. SQL is huge. There's all these different lines of business. Like, they're remarkably resilient because they don't make their money from one place.
But they make a lot of their money from two places.
Yes.
Windows and Office.
Yeah.
Server and Tools,
Well-
I think, has now, although it's not called Server and Tools anymore, what is it now? It's Enterprise and Cloud. Has now...
We still call it Server.
Internally, it's still Services and Tools. Servers and Tools. But yeah, that's now exceeded, when you look at the quarterly revenue numbers, that's eclipsing the Windows division now.
Right.
So yeah, things are changing, but that doesn't mean Windows is trivial. It's core.
What do you think, Billy?
Well, when it comes to Microsoft strategy and stuff like that, I try not to think about it.
That's probably
Because-
wise.
For my own mental well-being, I'm not sure I want to think about it because it's so far into the realm of insanity that if I understood it, I'd be afraid for myself. So I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Look, compare it to this. I don't know if people that follow military stuff understand about how different the U.S. Army is from every other army in the world. And there was an extract from the Russian military doctrine that said the problem with the Americans is that with American military doctrine is they don't read their manuals and they don't feel any compulsion to follow them, so we have no idea what they're going to do. All right, so to me that's Microsoft. They have in the past few years violated every marketing principle I know of for their main products. So I have no idea what they're going to do.
Well, I think we've been working with Microsoft long enough to know it doesn't speak as one. It's not a monolith. It's not one company. And the question is, how unified or disparate are the different pieces? I think they've been pretty disparate. So then when you distill it down into a single strategy, when it's really not, of course you're going to scratch your head. The whole rubric of the reorg is to change that. Whether it ends up being successful, I don't know, but at least its heart is in the right place. And hopefully there will be more cohesion, and then I think we'll have a slightly easier time trying to intuit what's going on.
Getting back to the embrace of JavaScript, isn't it sort of like blowing against the wind? I mean, they tried to own the browser with, JScript before that, VBScript before that. There have been so many attempts to own the internet that have just failed for everybody, that JavaScript seems to be the only thing standing. JavaScript and HTML, and those two governing bodies don't even talk to each other.
Yeah, and the danger there is, it's another thing I talked about in the keynote yesterday, is that it looks like the complexity that flows out of that change there. I mean, you talk about, for enterprise, you might be able to cope with that, but small to medium-sized businesses can't. Unless the Xamarin world or somebody finds a way to tame that complexity, that world has got some inherent limitations in it. As I said yesterday, it may be that the most relevant sentence for the 21st century in kind of across politics and business and everything else is that if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. Economist Herb Stein said that a number of years back. So, to me, this increasing in complexity, this fragmentation of, I've got to know n number of JavaScript frameworks to make all this work, and n goes up every few months, that is unsustainable.
Right.
Now, I don't know what comes after, but that is unsustainable.
And I'm wondering if to me, the thing that's been disrupted really is the hegemony of the mouse and keyboard. And I don't know that we're finished disrupting that. The touch is an interesting one, but gesture's there. Been a couple of Google Glasses running around lately that sort of speak to a whole other UI again. The Kinect approach is interesting. It's the Xbox One lands any day now. We're going to start seeing another set of interfaces again. I just don't think we're done.
No,
we're
we
still
got on-track.
shattering.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about consolidating. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think we're in a very disruptive phase after 20-something years of remarkable stability.
So can I also postulate a little bit? This is probably a very dangerous thing to say in a room full of developers.
Yeah.
But the majority of developers on the planet are not like any of you in this room. They actually don't care about the tools that they're using. What they care about is the end result. That's why you're seeing them, they don't even focus. They say, I want to build an iPad app. And they go off and use Objective-C, which is unpleasant, and build an iPad app.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for. They'll look for anything. They look for framework tools and everything. Anything that allows them to achieve their end goal.
Right.
They're not software people. They're not computer scientists, mostly anyway. And that, I think, puts all of the technology into kind of a different view. It's like, what are you going to give them? People just keep moving forward with these simpler and simpler to get an app out type tools.
Hey, and for some developers, the longer it takes to get there, the better, because that's job security right there, man.
Last thing I'd want to do is deliver software. I just want to work on software.
Yeah, I want a job. I don't actually want to ship. What are you, crazy?
How does that change if you've got 140 million people building software,
right,
basically in the world? Only 9 or 10 million of them actually trained to do that. What does it mean for the tools that they use? I don't think any of us actually believe that, kind of these non-professional developers would ever go and pick Objective-C to build apps in, but it's the only choice they had. We love the, .NET people love .NET, but other people love other things.
Yep.
We find for even our own app ecosystem, a lot of the apps that are getting into the Windows Store are not necessarily built using a full version of VS. They're using framework tools and things that allow people to snap things together and get an idea into an app, rather than actually having to focus on the art of writing software and code.
So I got a story for you. We rolled the RV into the resort here last night, and a guy out at the front, I followed him into the back lot, and then he brought me back so I could park the RV. And he said, "You're into computers?" "Yeah." Says, "I'm taking classes in school." "Oh yeah? What are you studying?" "C." "Why?" "It's like a computer science. It's a required class." "Oh. Then what are you going to do?" "Java." "Oh. Why?" It's like, that's part of the curriculum. I'm like, I gave him my card. Here, listen to this show. Oh, thanks. So I'll be hearing from him probably. Or maybe not. I don't know.
Are we going faster here? I mean, we've mostly talked about what the new apps look like. What about the development process? Do you feel like we're actually getting better? Or are you, Rocky, your Magenics practice, are you delivering more features sooner? Is this happening?
I should say yes. Of course we are.
Of course we are. Everything is better.
Good answer. Good answer.
But
Up and away.
yeah,
I remember
absolutely higher Magenic.
But I also remember I can't remember where you wrote this, but you had, after all this time of working in Silverlight and things like, and working in the XAML stack, you got thrown back into a WinForms project.
Yes.
And just had this comment of, I've forgotten how fast we built stuff back
yes,
then.
it's true. And so no, I'm not at all convinced we're moving forward, at least in terms of productivity, or basically, if I wake up on the left side of the bed and have a cynical day, because I got my start programming, mini computer software against a terminal.
Sure.
And I think, wow, most of the software that we write is still collecting data from a user and printing it out as reports.
Yep. Still CRUD apps, man.
And so building CRUD apps in today's, XAML-based or HTML-based world, if anything, is harder than it was. 20 or 30 years ago when we were using a mainframe mini computer and terminals, right? Turns out those were really good technologies, if, incredibly boring, right? Compared to today's stuff with color and graphics. But then on the other hand, when I wake up and roll out of bed on the right-hand side and I'm not having a cynical day, right? I think, well, okay, so maybe we're not any more productive. If anything, it probably takes longer to build a data entry app than it used to. But my data entry app can run on a device in my pocket, it can run on a 30-inch screen, it can, right? So it's
and
not
it works anywhere in the world.
Works anywhere in the world, right, exactly. Yeah. So it's not as though we haven't moved forward. We just haven't moved forward in terms of being able to build software faster.
Isn't the real issue that we're still building CRUD apps?
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
We aren't. Our teams are not building CRUD apps anymore.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you've got to have part of it that gets the information in and out.
There's going to be some data.
But the stuff that we're working on is how do people find the information they need? How do they connect pieces together? How do we visualize it for them? We are the kind of apps we're writing now because in the modern app era, we've got the ability to show the data to people in all kinds of ways. Because of all this wonderful stuff we have on the back end, we have the ability to find and fetch information for them in a much richer way than we did before.
You're invoking magic.
Then, we're doing the stuff we're doing in apps today, we couldn't have done 10 years ago.
Right.
And it isn't really CRUD. CRUD is dropped from 60-70% of the typical business app that we wrote. It's probably down in the 20 to 30% range now.
I mean, I cover all the analytics stuff that is making a lot of what you're talking about possible, and no doubt it's important and it's allowing us to break new ground, and clearly your business has moved on into a different league. I don't think CRUD's going away though. I think CRUD is business. You look at business processes, you look at what people have to do day in and day out. It has to do with storing information and looking it up.
You can't have big data if you don't have data.
Exactly. You got to data enter it at some point.
That's pretty good.
So I don't know. I think CRUD's just there. I think it's a fact of life.
But why are we building new CRUD apps? Aren't the ones that are already getting the data in just fine? Am I getting any value out of the new one I'm building? Or is it just that an IT organization said, we need something to do, let's build a new version of this app?
It's a quality of this industry to completely reinvent the same thing we already
Sure, and that's not good because you take one of the signature apps we've written for nurses to do information, carry around a tablet for information in hospitals. There are 6 sources of information for that in the hospital. They're doing very, very light data entry on that thing. The key thing for them is the accessibility for all the information about the patient brought together from 6 different systems into one place. Yeah. And we do adapter patterns and things like that on the background to make it all work.
But the big thing
that's the magic for them is they don't carry a folder that's half an inch thick
or have to go back to a desktop machine in an office somewhere to look at the data on the patient. They're
Yes.
now with the they brought the machine to the work, to the patient, and have a consolidated view of what's
Yes,
going
and
on.
the data they're getting, some of it certainly is entered through a CRUD app, but a lot of it comes automatically from machines that gather it.
Right.
Nobody, a lot
So
of times.
there's no longer somebody sitting there looking at those reports and transcribing them.
Right.
You're disintermediating a lot of that workflow.
Yeah, the blood pressure machines know how to tell the computer at what the blood pressure is. You
Right.
don't enter that anymore.
Yeah.
So to me,
Telemetry data.
that's a pretty dramatic change from the CRUD stuff we did up through, let's say, up to about 10 years ago.
Well, guys, I think that's about a show. We don't have much more time. Final statements? You want to take a stab at where we're going to be next year? Anybody? You want to put their future cap on? Matt?
I'll make one comment that I see. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. I think the one thing that everybody in this room is going to have to focus on is not really the modern experience and everything, it's quality. What I find is that my kids who have grown up in a technology age do not accept problems.
Yeah.
If anything goes wrong, it's my fault, apparently.
Right.
It's like, what happened to the internet? Why is the internet so slow? Not me.
My children have had such good internet their whole lives. The only time the internet doesn't work is when they're in trouble. What didn't I do? The internet doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think the thing to remember there is that quality is going to be number one on all of your end users' minds,
Yeah.
and they are not us, and they don't accept it when things go wrong.
Right.
Or when things are limited, I think.
Yeah,
I
limited,
agree with
yep.
that, but like my son, both my kids are gamers, and they've quit using consoles because you can't get at mods and you can't get at a lot of the fancy stuff that are on PCs,
Right.
right? And so on one hand, it feels like the industry is kind of dumbing down. We're using tablets and lower powered computers and everything's getting quote unquote simpler to use. But I don't think that can last, because I think that especially this younger generation assumes that these computers can do basically anything. And if it blocks you, they will go find a different platform. They'll give up their PS4 for a PC, even if it's maybe a little harder to use, because the PC lets them do what they want to do.
And businesses ought to think about that generation when they come into the workforce.
Sure.
And set them down in front of a 1990s era Battleship Gray. You're not doing the business any favors in terms of their connection to the business when that's their history.
That's their interface.
And you're putting them in front of something that just says to them, this is a low quality company that I really have to endure instead of love my job.
Sure.
Andrew, final comment?
Yeah, I think we're going along a maturity model, and we actually have two streams going on. I think there continues to be a business computing stream that's honestly not all that different than it has been for a couple of decades. And that involves more sophisticated hardware, and it involves perhaps more mundane software. On the other hand, we have consumer-oriented applications or apps, and we have appliance-level hardware. And they're going to coexist, and they're going to overlap and intertwine. But right now, I think what we're doing is we're so mesmerized by the new stuff, we're conflating the two together, and we're getting all confused about how to handle it. I think we're going to have to deconstruct that a little bit, and then we'll get to a more sophisticated approach to dealing with both and unifying them when that makes sense.
Good advice. And that's where we're going to leave it. Another big round of applause for our panel. We'll see you next time on The Tablet Show.